College football season is here, and Underdog Fantasy has the perfect deal to get you in the game. Use the code WALKON to grab up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free pick on all the college football action. Whether you're riding with your alma mater or making bold predictions, this is your chance to win big all season long. Don't miss out. Use code WALKON, that's WALKON, to get started today.
And now it's First and Goal with your host, Big Bear and the Curtain Guy.
Welcome back, college football fans. We are First and Goal. I can't believe we're already a third of the way through the season, but we're getting back to it. I'm the Curtain Guy, Cole Schutte.
I'm Big Bear T. Tyler Urbanski.
And we're going to dive right in. Big Bear, we're going to kind of put football, specifically, Big Ten matchups on the back burner for a little bit, because this was something that you and I have been tossing back and forth all week long with the news out of UNLV. And it's going to touch on a point on something that we have been talking about since this podcast started. It's NIL and what regulations and I guess stipulations are going to start to come with it. So I don't know if you want to give the people a rundown of kind of the situation of what has happened this past week, what we're seeing, and potentially where we might be headed.
Yeah, so the whole purpose of NIL when it started up in college football was really to give players that opportunity to be compensated based on their talent, their personal brand. While that's a huge step forward for these student athletes, I think it's become clear that this system really lacks that proper oversight function that the whole system needs on both ends. And two critical issues are starting to emerge here. We're getting player transfers based on these NIL deals or failed NIL deals. And then you're having programs on the other side of it not really fulfilling the promises that they're giving to these players in the forefront of the whole thing. Both these problems really reveal the need for stronger regulations and ensuring that this system benefits athletes fairly without really undermining that integrity of the sport. So the UNLV situation at hand, quarterback Matthew Sluka, UNLV's 3-0. Let's start with that. They're honestly considered by many to be that team sticking out from the G5 as a potential playoff caliber team. What's being said, and we'll try and get to it because there's a lot of poop being thrown from both sides of the gambit here. From the Matthew Sluka front was that he was at Holy Cross last year. In his recruitment of being called over to UNLV, he was offered an NIL deal of $100,000. And that money was either supposed to be up front, whether that money was supposed to be paid over time. We're not really certain of those situations. All we know is that Matthew Sluka transferred from Holy Cross to UNLV, moved from Massachusetts to Nevada, and has played 3 games so far this season for the Rebels. On the UNLV side of things, UNLV is saying, no, there was never any deal in place with Matthew Sluka. Their stance on it was that his representation for his NIL came to the athletic department within the last couple of weeks after winning games, demanding more money. So there's a lot of bad blood coming on both sides of the river here. And what's been done is Matthew Sluka was given $3,000 in relocation money from the university. Again, he moved from Massachusetts to Nevada, and he has not seen any more money since. There's been talks that they would offer him like a $3,000 stipend per month for the next, I believe, 4 months. So that's $12,000 when you were originally supposedly offered $100,000, $88,000 less. That's a big difference. And so ultimately what has happened is Matthew Sluka has left the program. He is going to redshirt the rest of the season. Those of you at home who aren't really our everyday college football fans, redshirting means they're essentially going to sit and they're going to retain that year of eligibility so they can carry it forward to next year. And he will try and catch on with another program and start up again next year. And Cole, there's been a couple other players through the course of this situation that have announced a similar thing. UNLV's running back has come up. USC has a defensive player also coming up through this ranks. And I think it's a problem that's going to continue to grow. So I'm curious to your initial thoughts on it as we dive into this, but yeah, that's the situation at hand right now.
Yeah, I think it's something that, while a tad shocking, I don't think it's necessarily surprising, if that makes sense. I think this was something that we all kind of saw was a possibility, right? When we first started to talk about NIL and the potential positive and negative outcomes that were going to come from it. I guess my first thought, and I'll go back to what I texted you when we started talking about this, is there are going to be a lot of universities and a lot of coaches that are going to say and promise a lot of shit to get players into their program. And this is going to continuously come up, and those programs are going to be found out as frauds, right? So I know people want to get upset that, people are buying players, putting together these stacked rosters. You and I are both fans of teams that have been accused of that in the offseason. But the fact of the matter is if you actually have the money to do it, it at least is going to put you on the right side of this type of issue, right? Because if the checks bounce, you're not going to be looked at or sought after by some of these transfers moving forward. So I think that's my initial response, but I will agree with you. I think that the regulations and the stipulations aspect of this NIL, thing that we have going on in college football is going to have to be resolved in some fashion sooner than later, because I think this whole wait and see mantra is going to get the whole NCAA and college football in general in a lot of trouble.
Well, and what this causes for all of college football is it's a chaotic environment. Instead of players really being recruited based on scheme fits, playing time, development, some of these players, just because they're 5 stars, they're top 100, maybe top 25 type players, maybe even in your pipeline, they're being lured off of these these NIL deals to come to schools. You think back, granted, these have worked out, like Nico Lamalieva at Tennessee. He's had a solid career so far for the Vols. But you look at guys like Jaden Rashada, was lured to Florida by way of being recruited at Miami by what is considered by a recent lawsuit as a $14 million NIL deal. Now, what you find in a lot of these NIL deals is everything's verbal. There's not a lot of things in writing, and they want it that way because there's no regulation and stipulation to back anything in writing. So all of this stuff being verbal, what do you back on? It's one person's word versus the other. And to circle back on that Jaden Rashada situation, he ends up leaving Florida because their NIL collective then turn around and pulls whatever NIL deal they had on the table for him. He then goes and spends a season at Arizona State, played okay. I mean, Arizona State, there's not much you could say about how their program was last year. It struggled. And now he finds himself on his way, or currently at Georgia, waiting to be in the wings to take over for Carson Beck after this year. So that's one piece. And like you said, the schools, the disturbing part on their front is that, again, they're promising these players and then failing to deliver on those promises, which in certain cases, these players are saying these payments are delayed. They're not even paid at all. And so you are undermining that trust that these players have with these programs, and you're leaving these young athletes, these young men, vulnerable when they could be relying on some of these funds to live. I mean, you don't know. We're not going to sit here and say that they need to have a certain lifestyle because they're a college kid and so forth. We get that, but it's not the same case for everybody. Going to school in California is not the same as going to school in Kansas. We can't say those are two of the same thing. And until this stuff fixes, we're going to be in such a constant flux where rosters will be consistently turning over. Coaches are going to be unable to build like long-term programs with sustainable growth. It's going to be, who can I pluck from where and when? and how will I fit them in to win now? And so that's where we're at. I think it's very much still the Wild West, and this is what we built this show on. If you've been watching First and Goal for the 4 seasons we've been here, our very first episode was when NIL was coming out. And it's so funny that we sit here today continuously talking about it and how 4 years later, we aren't where we need to be with it yet. We still have a long way to go. And it's so much at the forefront of our day-to-day college football lives. So that's just kind of my thoughts on it. I guess turning to you, Cole, like if they were to put certain regulations in place, I know you're the sports management guy here, so I'll turn to you with maybe your thoughts about like what makes this better? What makes this a better environment for these programs, these players, where it's not as chaotic, I guess. Let's just start there and see where we go.
I mean, I'd like to tell you that the NCAA would bring down regulations, but the problem is I don't think that's where the NCAA is headed. And with the court decisions that have been made in the past months, past years about NIL, I think they've lost even more power on it. I think the NCAA understands that they are going to be the police or the punishment arm of college football, and that is what they're moving their focus to. And so I'm not sure that they're going to be able to bring down any type of regulation, but I think as these other conferences, especially the ones that are clearly becoming power conferences like the Big Ten and the SEC, and who appear primed to kind of branch off and make their own higher level of college football, I think they will be the ones that ultimately end up putting in regulations. Now, whether or not that looks like dollar amounts or whether it looks like contract law, which I would tend to move to, you're already basing this on an NFL model, right? You're basing the season on it. With NIL, you're basing payment on it, right? You're treating the transfer portal basically as glorified free agency anyways. You've removed the one-time transfer policy. These kids are allowed to pretty much hop wherever they want to and immediately play. So if that's how we're going to treat it, then you need to treat them as professionals in that manner and bring contracts into this and have both parties with the understanding of this is the agreed upon amount, and both are liable for that. And if neither one of them lives up to the deal in any capacity, then lawsuits are applicable, court decisions are applicable. So that's my general feeling as we sit here now. And like you said, it is funny that we talked about this 4 years ago, and we're sitting here today still almost regurgitating the same stuff that we were, because I feel like we've actually lost more grip on this than we gained on this whole NIL thing. And I think that's what's the most frustrating and confusing part for college football fans across the country.
Yeah, it feels like NIL at this point in the game, it's like who has the deepest pockets, who has the ability to throw the most money at the wall and watch it stick. Kind of going, like you said, with the contract side of things, or even if the NCAA could do anything at all, which again, like you said, this might not even be possible, but maybe the ability to have a cap, something that says every school cannot exceed X amount of dollars in NIL. I mean, that at least levels somewhat of a playing field where you can't have Florida or Tennessee offering multi-million-dollar deals to some of these top recruits in the country. Now, is that fair? I don't know. I think it's at least a start, because if you're capping a whole entire roster's NIL, well, you have to use your money a little more wisely at this point. And granted, you might still have players leaving, but then, okay, what if you turn it into maybe a waiting period on the transfer situation where like maybe NIL money isn't all divvied out at one time. Like it has to be structured where it's paid over a week basis, kind of like contracts. Again, in the NFL, they get paid game checks. This is how this works. And that way, that there's accountability on both the collective standpoint and also the player standpoint, that payments are happening. And I work in the tax realm. nonprofits, which is what a lot of these collectives should be, they have to report what money they're spending on what, and they should probably be reporting how much money they gave to X, Y, and Z. I think there should be more transparency because it creates a system with a lot of competitive integrity, and it ensures that NIL has an intended purpose, which is, again, to benefit the student athletes at the college level. So I don't know. That's might be a place to start, I guess.
I'm glad you mentioned the transparency part of it, because let's be honest with ourselves, paying college football players is nothing new, especially in some schools south of the Ohio River, right? This is common. It's just now out in the open now. So I think that's a good point, that if you want more regulation, there needs to be more transparency, right? Because people aren't going to understand it if they can't see it. And so I think that's a huge point of it as well. I think those, the contracts, a part of it, the regulation side of it, it all needs to be well known so that, one, everybody knows what they're getting involved with that is in this process. And two, coaches can't play dumb when they're like, oh, well, I didn't know I couldn't offer him more than, that amount. So I agree with you. Now, whether or not we can actually get there, or even get there in a reasonable time frame, I don't know. I have a feeling you and I are going to be sitting here 4 years from now still having this same conversation, but here's to hoping that maybe we can get a little bit of progress.
That's a great segue, I guess, because sitting here 4 years from now doesn't happen unless our fans at home follow, like, and subscribe to the show. Now, I know many of you are watching and you've seen this week to week following us this season. We put this challenge out a couple weeks in a row now. We're going to do it one last week as we get to October, because October, as you'll hear about next week, is one of our favorite months. Share the show to a friend, family member, anybody you know that loves college football, Big Ten football as much as you do, as much as we do, because these topics we love talking about. And I think that the more of you we can gather around to continue to talk about this topic, who says that it wouldn't grow into actual change, people? So there's only one place to start. I guess, gosh, I lost my train of thought of what I was going to say here at the end, but if it comes back to me, I'll bring it up. I guess, kind of putting this conversation to bed, I don't think this is the end of this trend this season for NIL. I think we're just beginning. We talked about Matthew Sluka. They lost their running back. I don't have his name in the forefront. I apologize, but Bear Alexander, a defensive lineman for USC, is also now deciding to red shirt. Granted, those reasons are left unknown. We are left to speculate that maybe it has something to do with NIL money. Again, he originally came from the SEC. It hasn't been smooth sailing for him at USC thus far. You'd think that it's getting better, but truth be told, we're just not sure. So that's up in the air. But I do think this continues to grow, whether it's at the G5 level, whether it's at the Power 4 level. We'll have to see as the weeks continue, and we might bring that up later on. So this is a great conversation. If you have comments or thoughts on this, make sure to post them below in the feed for Spotify, YouTube. We'd love to hear what you have to say on this topic, and continue to talk with, again, the rest of us here at First and Goal and our community as well. So shifting gears to week 5, game 1 that we are previewing is... You might not hear me, but I am drumming onto the table. We are going to talk about Maryland and Indiana. Indiana's 4-0. This offense is clicking. This is a team that has far exceeded what many have thought that would happen this season. I think we were saying Indiana was going to end the season with 4 wins. They're there, right? No losses, already at 4 wins. So from the model's concern, as Badger loves to say, F the model, throw it out the window. Like, Indiana's that team to prove it wrong. Maryland, I told you at the beginning of the season, I'm dying on this train that I think Maryland is a sleeper. I think Maryland could win 8 or 9 games. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm riding that through. Let's live with that. All right. So to the game itself, Saturday, noon banger in Bloomington on Big Ten Network. 3-1 Maryland, 4-0 Indiana. Looking at this matchup, Cole, You got a Maryland offense that is sneaky, but could be tripped up. You got an Indiana offense that seems to be clicking on many, if not all cylinders. What do you think about this matchup as it comes up this weekend?
I think it's the most intriguing one that we have on this slate, right? I mean, there's a lot of good ones, and we'll talk about another one coming up next. But I don't think we really have any clue about what either of these teams are at this point, right? You have Maryland, who's 3-1. They've looked good. We had a lot of expectations, like you said, coming into the season. Have that, I'm not going to call it a bad loss, but it's not a great loss to Michigan State, right? Where even though they were able to get 3 interceptions on Aiden Childs, they just couldn't find a way to pull that game away. And Michigan State was the ones who were able to win. You have Indiana, who hasn't played a team yet that's likely to go bowling, but who gives a shit? They're 4-0, right? So I don't know. This is a very confusing matchup to me, and my initial jump at it is that this Indiana offense is going to be what the difference is, but I don't know if they've actually played a legitimate defense at this point. And I think that's what gives me some pause on this. Whereas Maryland, even though they've lost, they have faced a Big Ten opponent. They know what they're getting into. And, you know, if they can get up early, how does Indiana respond to it? So I'm very interested in this one. I don't know that I'll be by a TV come noon on Saturday. I might be at, an alumni game to watch my just god-awful Kent State Golden Flashes attempt to play the sport we call football. God bless them, because I just can't do it anymore. Anyways, yeah, I'll toss it back to you, but my that's kind of my thoughts. I know they're very jumbled, but I kind of looked at this game throughout the week, and I'm like, I've gone back and forth. I know we just made our finalized picks a couple minutes before this, but this was one I kept going back and forth where I can see either team kind of walking out with the victory on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think Maryland should be 4-0 other than buckling late in that loss to Michigan State. Like, their passing games look great. The ground attack has been really solid. Turnover margins like among the best in the country. There weren't any takeaways that they had in the win versus Villanova, but Maryland has come up with 10 turnovers so far in the first 3 games, and they've given it up just once before last week. So they come in and play an Indiana team that has yet to mess up in the turnover margin. And I'm sure Indiana fans, if you're listening to this at home, you're like, why the hell would you just say that? It's like every announcer that I've ever heard call a no-hitter in the 7th inning. I know, I'm sorry I'm saying it, but you got to listen here, because like Cole said, Indiana's actually playing a good defensive team this time around. And I think it helps when, you haven't had to deal with that much adversity whatsoever so far. Like, I think that plays in Maryland's hands. I think that if Maryland comes up with like 2 takeaways, making Curtis Rourke make some mistakes, I think they might just crack the code on Indiana. And then you have a 60-minute gunfight all the way to the finish line about who's going to pull away at the end. So, but then you look at this Indiana team, like, there's a reason they're not screwing up on offense. Like, the coaching staff has been that good. Like, veteran transfer quarterback Curtis Rourke is that good. And I think Indiana football this season, 2024, might actually be good. We need to consider that, not just call it a fluke. I think it's pretty crazy just how simple that can be at times. You have to block well, you have to tackle, don't make mistakes, repeat. This was something that we talked about in our Big Ten preview when we discussed Indiana, was that Curt Cignetti had to come in and make them fix the fundamental issues that was keeping this Indiana team from winning close games. Now they're at that point, and you see why it works. That's what this whole system appears to be working. Curtis Rourke connects on just about most of his passes. Rushing attack has been hitting 222 yards or more against everyone except UCLA. That's kind of interesting. I know UCLA is a Big Ten opponent, but they have not played very well defensively so far. So maybe that's just a blip. and also the pass rush for the Hoosiers has been terrific. It's been fantastic. Maryland lost to Michigan State because it couldn't run and they couldn't stop the Spartans from passing the ball. So key points for Indiana, stop the run. Key points for Maryland, don't let Curtis Rourke get hot and consistent. That's how you stay in this game. And so I guess when we turn around and kind of give thoughts on who we think wins this game, I guess I'll go and let you take it first, Cole. Who do you think wins this game and why?
Like I said, I went back and forth with this a lot, and I think I ultimately ended on Indiana because of how their offense has looked. Right? Again, I understand it has been against not great teams that won't even crack 500, but they're doing what you're supposed to against bad teams, right? And with Maryland, I've watched them a few times, and even in the wins, they just kind of look clunky at times, right? And if you can't do that, or you mess up a few times, and even if they're not turning the ball over or don't force any turnovers on Indiana, I just think you can't really stall out and give this Indiana offense more opportunities. And I think ultimately that's what's going to happen is Maryland is going to stall out on a few drives. And I think they're going to continuously give the ball back to Indiana. And the Hoosiers are going to use those opportunities to ultimately take this game away and end up 5-0 before, they got to play against the meat of their schedule.
And I think what we've talked about is going to be the big piece to this game. Again, who can make the other break from what they've been doing so far? I actually have this as my upset game of the week. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I've hit on all three thus far. I'll have to double check that. So this could be where I break that streak, but I'm going to take Maryland. I think that I'm sticking again to my guns of this is a good Maryland team. I think this is a big step up for the Hoosiers, and they're going to be the toughest opponent they face yet. But I think that Maryland's going to be able to get this done if they can get it within close striking margin. And like we talked about the turnover game, make that Indiana offense face adversity with takeaways, whether early or late. I think that Maryland can squeak by here. I don't think it's going to be a big surprising blowout type win on either side of the ball. I think that whoever wins this game wins it close. I'm going to take Maryland 27-23 over Indiana, and let's see if they can knock off the Hoosiers for the first time this year. Moving to our next game in the previews, this is the big one for the week, folks. This is Penn State and Illinois. We're talking about two unbeatens coming to town. What's really interesting here, this Illinois team, we didn't give a lot of hope for last week against Nebraska. I think we picked the Huskers across the board, and Illinois punched us right in the mouth with that one. I thought it was a really hard-fought overtime win, a really deserved win. And now they're going to get Penn State. It's going to be an interesting one. I'll kind of let you tip this one off, Cole, with what you think at the beginning here, but this Penn State team has rolled with two straight MAC teams. They had a close one with Bowling Green. As you know, Kent State last week, it was what it was. They were 1.5 points away from hitting the parlay. So once again, I'm screwed on the parlay because of 1.5 points. Yeah, that's neither here nor there. I'll think better this week, but this Illinois team's not a joke. This is a solid veteran-laden team. So what do you think here?
Well, first off, I'm going to tell you to just bet against Kent State straight up, and you can win a lot of money that way. I have utilized that to my advantage the last couple of weeks, and I will be doing it again, even if I'm sitting at the game on Saturday. But no, this Illinois team is for real. I again was one of those people who picked Nebraska last week and was surprised that Illinois really wasn't bothered by that raucous Friday night crowd at Nebraska. And so I don't think they're going to be very, I guess, intimidated by the whiteout crowd at Penn State. And I think it's funny that Penn State has kind of moved that whiteout game back and forth throughout their season. You know, it was supposed to be Illinois, went to Washington, back to Illinois, because I don't think Penn State anticipated this being a top 20 showdown. Neither did anybody in the country, but here we are. So yeah, they're a veteran laden team. They're not intimidated. They have good line play. I think Penn State is really going to have to buckle the chin straps up for this one, because, you know, this is how Burt builds his team. This reminds me a lot of his Wisconsin teams, that they don't do anything that's going to wow you or impress you, but you're going to have to come to play football and bring your lunch pail if you want to beat them. So, I think the thing that really sticks out to me is the Illinois passing offense, right? It's just effective. That's the word that I'm just going to keep using in this, right? Altmaier, he's good for at least 200 yards a game, 71% completions, no interceptions on the season. Like I said, nothing explosive. He's not going to hit you for multiple touchdowns a game, or, you know, throw over the top on you, but he's going to do what he needs to move the ball up and down the field and when it matters most. So I'll be interested to see how he goes against the currently 9th ranked passing defense in Penn State. And we talked about in the past how Penn State likes to, you know, kind of draw up blitzes and pressure the quarterback. And can they do that with the veteran Altmaier? I guess that's the kind of the main thing that I'm looking at, because if Illinois can't, you know, kind of keep the ball and march down the field and kind of draw out some of these drives, I think it might be an ugly affair, because Penn State's offense is, at least the passing offense has really started to show how explosive it can be.
Yeah, and I think while veteran laden and it might not be explosive, I think that Illinois offense and passing game in general has just been really effective. It's not saying that Luke Altmaier's Shedeur Sanders out there throwing for 400 yards, but he's good for at least 200 a game, and he hasn't thrown an interception. He's hitting 70+% on his throws. Like, it's not high powered, but it's effective. And I think they're sticking to the basics, right? Don't turn the ball over, force a lot of turnovers, generate pass rush, come up with those big timely plays, nothing consistently big plays. Again, like we said, it's not a high powered offense, but you know, I don't think they're going to get rattled. I think that they like to stay the course, and this might be the best Illinois has played under Burt Bielema, because it's working so far. And for Penn State, you know, a lot of the talk for weeks prior was just that they're not throwing the ball downfield. They're not gashing them with big, high-powered, explosive plays. Well, they 30 touchdown passes with just 2 picks last year, but you have to be careful to not paralyze your offense by sticking to one thing. And I think Drew Aller's done a better job in obviously the last week or two. Of course, they're playing MAC opponents, but they're the number 2 team in the nation. They're averaging 17.3 yards per completion this year. So I know it has something to do with opponent, but I do think that in tune-up games like this, you need those repetitive receptions and motions in your offense to start to click when the season gets going and gets tough. And I think that might be where this Penn State team's at. So I'm torn on this as we look to who we pick and who takes this game. I know that Illinois is a really good team. They're a tough team. They're not going to be an easy win for Penn State at all. They do have them at home. It's a whiteout. So all those things kind of work in their favor. But the defense for Illinois has to get to Aller, and it has to, fight for all 60 minutes. Like, this Penn State explosion in their offense, if that starts to click and it starts to hit, that's where this game gets out of hand. Because if they deal enough body blows to the Illini, I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up for the whole game. I think it could be like a fourth quarter game where Penn State might get up by a touchdown or two, and then they just slowly drift off. You know, I don't think that this is a big blowout. I think that Illinois covers the spread. The spread's too high. I think it's 19 points. That's too high for 2 Big Ten teams, truthfully. And I don't know. That's just where I lie. So going back to my pick, I am taking Penn State in this one. As I said, I think Illinois covers that. I think it's within 2 touchdowns. Maybe it's at 10 points. Give me Penn State like 31-21 over Illinois on Saturday. What about you?
I'm in pretty much in the same boat that you are. I agree. I think this Penn State offense it is more explosive than it was in 2023, which is not saying a whole lot because in 2023 it was get what we can, but be careful, right? And I think a lot of people are misconstrued with what Drew Aller had with 30 touchdowns and 2 interceptions on the year. They must have thought that he was just supremely efficient. And the fact is that it was very limited with the offense. Didn't take a lot of shots downfield, kind of, kept to themselves. Didn't, they relied on the running game. And this year they've really opened it up. And a lot of that has to do with scheme, as we talked about being a crucial part of it. But I will mention that this is quite a bit of a jump for that passing defense. Okay. They're playing the 32nd ranked passing defense in Illinois. Like we said, good defensive line, good defensive backs. It's kind of how Illinois has operated, at least when they've had their up years, right? The next highest passing defense that they've played this season is West Virginia, who's currently ranked 102nd in the country, giving up over 400 yards a game. So it is going to be a bit of a jump, and I don't think you're going to see a ton of explosive plays from Penn State. That being said, I do think that Penn State will make I'm going to call them back-breaking plays, right? Those 3rd and 9s, those 3rd and 8s that Illinois desperately will need to hold off to keep Penn State off the field. I think those are the ones that Penn State is going to pick up, and they're going to pick up late. And that is ultimately what pushes them into victory for this one. I'm in the same range as you. I think that 18-point spread is way too high for this. I have this game a little more less scoring. I have it 28-17 Penn State, but yeah, I think it's going to be a slugfest. And again, if you're a Penn State fan, I think you just need to acknowledge that this is not the typical Illinois team that you normally see.
Yeah. So those are going to be 2 really key games to watch this weekend. We're going to dive into our other picks. We do want to give you an update on the goal line stand scoring. And I know some of you watching us on YouTube, you're waiting for our big flashy graphics. Big Bear's tired, folks. Big Bear had a big day. So no graphics this week. You're just going to have to listen to the sweet sounds of our voice as we give you this information. Updated goal line stand scores. We have the wonderful model in first place with 69 points. Curtin Guy in second place now with 66. Big Bear in third with 65, and Jeff Badger trailing behind a little bit with 55 points. He's picked a lot of upsets, and it's not been fun to him. So let's see if he can turn that around this weekend and get back in the scoring here. So first game we're going to cover, and it's a small list this week too. We have the wonderful Michigan Wolverines playing the Minnesota Golden Gophers here. Michigan with a very tough, hard-fought win against USC last weekend. Cole, who do you take in this one?
Yeah, I thought we were going to do this a little earlier in the show, but I wanted to eat crow for this because I know we do have a bunch of Michigan fans that listen to this. So I will eat crow for last week. I was surprised. I thought that USC was kind of going to be able to throw all over Michigan, and it took them a little longer to figure out that you don't need to play 2 high safeties against Alex Orji, but I think Michigan knows who they are, and I think they're going to stick to that for better or worse. And the bad news for Minnesota is they can't stop the run to save their lives. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the Wolverines in this one, and I think they're going to run all over them just like Iowa did, and add another win to the column.
So should we say that like the over under, should we do that as a prop bet? Should we just do Alex Orji under like 20 yards passing and we'd probably hit, right? I mean, that's got to be a big one.
I think they're just going to keep taking it down each week, and then eventually you have to be wrong. I mean, listen, 32 yards is not great, but I'd have to think that a Division I college quarterback could at least get over 20 a game.
I mean, even Kent State got 18.
See?
I'm sorry, I had to throw that one. Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I've got to eat crow from last week. I did think USC was going to win it. I thought early when Michigan took that lead that they were going to kind of pull away for all 4 quarters, and I was actually impressed with USC staying in that. I really didn't know if USC was going to be able to hang with Michigan when we got to the preseason. I think they did. They hung with them just fine. I mean, it came down to a 4th and goal play in the final seconds. This wasn't a really dominant win by either team. I think those were 2 really hard fought programs, and it shows how deep the Big Ten is, right? This is a new team, a team that we weren't really sure was going to bring a whole lot of firepower on either side of the ball to the Big Ten in this first year. Granted there's change happening, but that's a good first showing for the Trojans, so that they can at least pat their back with their teams fighting. And so that's important. They need to get more help from Miller Moss. I'll tell them that. But then for Michigan, I mean, the Iowa offense is like the norm in college football now, apparently. Wow. So I think Michigan just runs the ball down Minnesota's throat. It's not going to look pretty, but it gets the job done. It gets them another win, and we keep moving forward. So I take the Wolverines as well. Kind of covering the other 2 picks on this one. Without being so shocking, the model takes Michigan, and Badger also takes Michigan here. We'll let them defend themselves next week should they mess up, but we'll give you their picks in the meantime. Next one, Cole, turning to you. Michigan State, Ohio State. First Big Ten game for the Buckeyes. A Michigan State team that is doing better than we expected so far. What do you think?
Yeah, I think again, we talked about this in the preseason. I like Ohio State's schedule and how it just kind of ramps up, right? You had a really bad Akron team, a better Western Michigan team, an even better Marshall team, and an even better Michigan State team before you get to a halfway decent Iowa team, and then ultimately that Oregon game before the bye week, right? So each week you kind of level up in competition, and I think this is a good starting point for Big Ten play. Does Michigan State have anything that necessarily, concerns me? No, and I don't mean that in a rude way. They're still rebuilding. I think they're going to get back to being in a really nice spot where they were in the D'Antonio years. But Aiden Childs is mobile. The defense is going to have to come out way more amped and way more focused than they did against Marshall. But the way that this Ohio State offense is clicking right now, I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to struggle to slow them down. So ultimately, I think the Buckeyes just proved to be too much, even if it does look a little slower in the first half like it did against Marshall.
And that's where I think that improvement needs to come for the Buckeyes on the defensive side of the ball. Is we know that in the second half they're cooking, they're good to go, they're amped up and ready. But I think those first 10 minutes of the game really need to at least take a jump. That Marshall game started off that 7-minute drive for the Marshall offense. I know Marshall's not a Power 4 team. I'm not going to say they're a bad team, but that's too long, And I think you agree with that, where like if that defense can come out and hammer right away from the get-go, that's that jump where you're like, yeah, that's a perfect play. We already know they're a playoff team, but that's what you want to see, right? You want that great start and continue it for 60 minutes. So I'm sticking with Ohio State too. I like Michigan State. I think I don't want to say that this is not going to be the 50-20 type Marshall game. This is more like if they score 40, probably that's a safer call. But I do think that Michigan State's going to at least get some points on the board. Let's say, 40 to 17, 21. I mean, it's closer, so that's where I stick with it. I take the Buckeyes too. Jeff and the model are also taking the Buckeyes per obvious situation, as you know. And next one, Nebraska and Purdue. I am going to jump in here first. I am taking Nebraska in a get-back game, and it's going to be a big get-back game. They are not happy with how that game finished last week against Illinois. That's an overtime game where it really kind of slipped away. I don't want to be Purdue this week. I think Purdue has struggled in many facets of the game. They're having trouble getting wins when they can grab them, and it's not going to get any prettier as that season continues to grow and get tougher and tougher for the Boilermakers. I'm taking Nebraska here as well. So what about you?
Yeah, listen, Purdue is just not taking the step that they needed to. Nebraska probably very disappointed after that overtime loss to Illinois and has probably been chomping at the bit to get back. And I think they're going to take their frustrations out on Purdue. Yeah, give me Nebraska at this one.
Northwestern and Iowa are on bye weeks this week, so we will not have picks for them. The last three on our list, we have Oregon and UCLA. This is a game that's kind of funny for yours truly because Saturday I'm going to wake up. I'm going to drive up to Detroit and watch my beloved Detroit Tigers, fingers crossed, win a game that could be ultra important. And that's all we're going to talk about baseball on the show today. That's all I'm going to say. But I'm going to come home from that at like 4 or 5 o'clock Eastern time. I'm going to have a dinner. I'm going to watch a movie, cuddle up on the couch, grab a blanket, whatever, settle in, and then maybe about an hour and a half. Then I'm going to watch this game kick off at 11 p.m. on Fox. So if you have nothing to do between midnight and 2 a.m. Eastern, anytime after 9 p.m. West Coast, like hit me up. I'll be on the couch. I'll be watching this. Hopefully it works out well for me. No heart racing. Give me Oregon in the long run of that speech, but I hope it follows the lines of Oregon State and less of prior games.
I don't think you have to worry, Big Bear. Kind of in the same breath as Purdue is UCLA right now. They're just a very bad team. They're not going to be bowl eligible this year. They got taken to the woodshed by Indiana, and I consider Oregon in a tier or two above Indiana. So I don't think you'll be sweating. I think you should take a nice little nap after dinner, to conserve your energy, and kind of just sit back and enjoy the throttling that should occur on a little Big Ten at night football.
Fingers crossed. Who would have thought we got Big Ten at night football? That's a different realm. And I guess we'll use this as a great opportunity. We just talked about Ohio State. We just talked about Oregon. We're 2 weeks away from Ducks and Bucks Part 2, which is our favorite episode. Cole's beloved Buckeyes, my beloved Ducks, will face off at Autzen Stadium October 12th. We will bring you a special episode for that. We're working on it. We're hoping that it will be one of our best episodes ever, because our first one was one of our best episodes ever, and for obvious reasons. It's a slugfest matchup. So as both teams grind towards that matchup, I think that we will get more antsy with anticipation. And a little spoiler, I'm having vibes that the Ducks will be wearing blackout for that. So I'm hoping I don't hate the day when it's over, but we'll see when it comes. So turning towards our last two games of the weekend. By the way, the Model and Badger take Oregon too. No surprise. Washington and Rutgers. This is where it gets a little dicey. Cole, I'll let you go first. Rutgers playing really well. Washington getting back on track. Who takes this one?
Yeah, this is another one that I kind of would toss back and forth with myself, much like the Indiana-Maryland game. I really like where Rutgers is at. I like where Washington is headed after stepping back up after losing the Apple Cup the week prior. I just think that at some point, the step up in talent level is going to be just a little bit too much for Rutgers to overcome, no matter how well they're playing football. And I think this is the week where we kind of see it come to fruition. I don't anticipate it being a blowout in either direction, even if Rutgers does win. But ultimately, I think that Washington proves to be just a little too much and ultimately ends up, I guess this would be considered an upset win.
I'm sticking with Rutgers here. I know that you really do have to get Kyle Monungai going. You look at his splits from the last two games prior. Yeah, against Akron, he had 208 yards rushing on 27. Week 1, he had 165 on 19 carries. Last week was 26 carries, 84 yards. It was a big step back for Kyle Monungai, only being able to cover 3.2 yards a carry. And this is a Washington team that has a bad taste in its mouth after that Washington State game and how well they ran down their throat, not just with the quarterback, but so Rutgers has to get him going. They have to be able to produce with him in order to open up a passing game, because Callie McManus is not going to be a John Mateer. He's not going to run for 2 touchdowns against Washington's defense. I don't think that's what's going to happen this weekend. And if they don't do that effectively and open that offense, that's where your upset comes in. I think that's where Washington steps up and takes it. You know what Rutgers really has going for it this weekend is that they get this game at home. I think that's going to be a difference maker. Washington has to travel, and that travel is a big difference if you're the one doing it. That's a long jet lag. So give me Rutgers here. The model is also picking Rutgers, but Badger is sticking with you, taking Washington in the upset here as well. So that's probably a 50-50 toss-up. Might be our biggest toss-up of the weekend. Our last matchup to cover on this week's episode, USC and Wisconsin. USC trying to bounce back from that Michigan loss last week in Ann Arbor. Who takes this one home?
Listen, Wisconsin is going to be in a load of trouble for the rest of the season with Van Dyke down. It wasn't pretty with Van Dyke in. With him down, I just don't like Wisconsin in a lot of matchups moving forward. If this was the Wisconsin of old, I would probably lean a little bit more towards Wisconsin because they could just do what Michigan did and just run the piss out of the ball. But they attempted this transformation to this pass heavy. Oh, cut out there. All right, we're back. This, downfield attack, and I think it's going to struggle mightily without Van Dyke.
Yeah. I'm sticking with USC here too. I just think that the Badgers are in a real lick of trouble, and it's not going to get better anytime soon. So I think USC gets a get-back game. They take this one, take the Trojans here, and the model and Badger are sticking with the Trojans as well. So a lot less of the same across the board. We got a couple of upsets here in the mix. Let's go to the player prop bets. We're picking a player with a stat line, who we think is going to go over or under. If you hit that, you get 3 points. If you're within 25% of that stat line, you get 2 points. Starting with mine, I'm going with Illinois quarterback Luke Altmaier. He's hung right around that 200-yard mark all season long, passing the ball. I think he can get a little bit better. I'm going to go with 225 yards passing. He hits that over mark in my player prop bet. For the model, Dante Dowdell, running back for Nebraska.
What are we doing?
They are going to, the model's sticking with it, going under 75 rushing yards in this matchup. They think that he's not going to hit that mark. And then Luke Altmaier also hitting for Badger on his prop bet. He has him going over 179 yards. I'll hit him up for that week one later because I went higher. So I got my eyes on you, Badger. And apologize, everybody. It seems like Curtin Guy hit some technical difficulties, but he is going with Dylan Gabriel, the Ducks quarterback, going with the over of 290 yards passing against UCLA. That Ducks passing attack going to be at the forefront of that matchup on Saturday night. I think Curtin Guy's back with us. Cole, I was just going through the prop bets, and I'm coming up with yours. I know you talked about Dylan Gabriel. Do you want to kind of cover that one for the fans for your prop bet?
Yeah, I apologize for that. We are at the mercy of our own internet sometimes, and mine has decided that it was done for the night. So, I don't know if you mentioned to them, but I am taking USC against Wisconsin. Yes, moving to my prop bet. I got Dylan Gabriel for over 290 yards passing. You referenced the Oregon State game. UCLA, I think, is even a further step down from Oregon State. And I anticipate Gabriel for going over 300 yards, actually. But I wanted to play it down a little bit to be safe. I think he's just going to dice him up, and the Ducks are going to keep their march going.
Well, everybody, that does it for us. That brings us to the end of the week 5 preview here. And again, like Curtin Guy said at the beginning, we're a third of the way through the season. We're maybe about a month and a half from really solidifying, getting up to that playoff ranking and seeing who is in the hunt and who's not. Stick with us throughout the weekend. Let us know what you think of some of these upsets, anything that comes across as we get into Big Ten play for the season. But this has been First and Goal.